Hey guys, tonight we are going to close our eyes and gently slip into a story that takes you far away, back in time across mountains and rivers into the heart of India's past. You're going to float into the age when the Gupta Empire flourished, a period often called India's Golden Age, where peace stretched across wide lands and art, music, and learning blossomed like lotus flowers opening at dawn. Imagine a soft breeze carrying the scent of sandalwood, the hum of chanting along temple corridors, and the sparkle of gold coins clinking in a bustling bazaar. So take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Post it in the comments. It's always fascinating to see how our little community spans the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself drifting along the warm air of the Ganges plain, the river curling like a silver ribbon beneath you. The sun is lowering, gilding the water, and rice paddies in molten light. Farmers carry baskets on their shoulders. Children laugh as they chase each other barefoot, and temple bells call softly from the distance. You feel a gentle calm washing over you, as if the land itself is breathing slowly. This is the India of the 4th century CE, on the cusp of something extraordinary. At this moment, the land is fractured. Small kingdoms rise and fall, each with its own local lord, its own warriors, and taxes its own worries. But from among them, one family is preparing to weave these fragments into a lasting empire. The Guptas begin small, not with a blaze of sudden conquest, but with careful alliances and deliberate steps. Picture a spark glowing in darkness growing into a flame. Historians still argue whether the Gupta era truly deserves the title Golden Age. Some say that phrase is too romantic, too simple, glossing over struggles and inequalities. Others defend it, pointing to the art, the peace, the discoveries that radiated outward for centuries. But for you walking barefoot on a dusty road shaded by banyan trees, the balance tips toward wonder. The world feels as if it is opening, blooming. You pass through a village where a wandering bard sings. He speaks of a dynasty that promises protection and justice, a lineage that claims descent from ancient rulers of old. People whisper that the Guptas are blessed by the gods, touched with dharma. You catch sight of a shrine where a flickering lamp burns without ceasing, tended day and night by a quiet priest. Ancient and mystical, such lamps are said to embody the eternal flame of the divine, ensuring prosperity to those who shelter it. The villagers believe this flame blesses the new rulers. The air smells of earth, mango leaves, and distant cooking fires. A woman offers you a small sweet made of jaggery and sesame, sticky in your palm, comforting on your tongue. The sweetness lingers as you walk on, and you notice how every detail seems sharper in this dusk, each cricket's chirp, each rustle in the bamboo thickets. Peace, though, is fragile. You hear rumors that across the frontiers, tribes gather strength that rival kings still watch with hungry eyes. Yet in this soft moment, the land rests. In the capital city of Pataliputra, once seat of the Mauryan emperors, long before the Guptas begin to take their place. They do not yet command the vastness of the land, but their vision stretches farther than their armies. Some say Chandragupta, the founder of the dynasty's glory, is not even a warrior at heart, but a man of shrewd decisions and careful pacts. His marriage into the Lichavi clan, powerful in the region, is remembered as the true starting point. Through love, or perhaps through politics, he binds kingdoms together, wrapping them in silk rather than steel. As you close your eyes, you can almost see the wedding procession elephants adorned with golden bells, veils of crimson silk, garlands of jasmine, scenting the air. The Gupta name begins to carry weight. Coins stamped with their marks pass from hand to hand in markets. Emissaries whisper promises in distant courts. Slowly, a sense of something larger than one's own village begins to spread. For you, drifting among them, it feels like a swelling tide. Under the stars that rise over the flat plains, farmers, poets, and priests all share the same moonlight. It is said that the gods themselves are pleased that Vishnu, preserver of the world, blesses this dynasty. In temple niches, small carved statues of Vishnu appear, his 4 arms holding conch, discus, mace, and lotus. Children look up in awe, listening to stories of his avatars, the many times he has descended to restore balance. They believe in whispers that the Guptas are under his wing, yet doubts remain. The bard you heard earlier pauses between verses, sighing softly, almost sadly. He wonders aloud if any empire can truly hold against time, if power can ever last more than a generation or two. His words linger like smoke. Empires rise, but night follows day. Even golden ages fade. Still tonight, as you lie beneath the open sky of ancient India, you feel the hum of possibility. The frogs croak along irrigation canals, stars reflect in the water, and the breeze carries the scent of wet soil. Somewhere, a temple lamp burns steadily, never flickering, as though it too breathes with the land. And for now you let yourself drift with that same rhythm, rocked gently in the cradle of history's promise. You linger now, moving deeper into the unfolding tale. The light of dawn shimmers on the wide Ganges plain, and you see the figure who will shape the dynasty's beginning. Chandragupta. Hind, the quiet founder of the Gupta line, prepares for his coronation. It is not a coronation of clashing swords or triumphant drums, but of careful ceremony, soft chanting, and the deliberate gestures of priests pouring sacred water. You stand among the gathered, feeling the incense curl in slow spirals toward the sky. The setting is not a great fortress or a vast battlefield. Instead, it feels intimate, woven of alliances, of marriages, of whispered promises. Chandragupta's marriage to Kumaradevi, the Licchavi princess, is still spoken of by villagers and courtiers alike. Some say it was a union of love, though most believe it was strategy, a bond between 2 noble houses that would bind regions and secure the Gupta claim. You picture their coins together, tiny discs of gold stamped with both their names, the king and queen, side by side, a simple design yet bold for its time, declaring unity not only in blood but in power. As the coronation unfolds, you notice the jewel-bright garments, silks dyed in indigo and saffron pearls strung across chests and flowers woven into the hair of courtiers. The chanting rises, syllables in Sanskrit echoing like flowing water. Chandragupta lifts his hand, the crowd bows, and for a moment the air feels still, as though the gods themselves pause to watch. Historians still argue whether his rule was expansive or modest, whether he commanded great swathes of land or simply a cluster of loyal provinces. But standing here in this scene, you feel the gravity of beginnings. There is a mystical thread woven through this day. An old sage at the edge of the gathering carries a palm leaf manuscript, said to hold predictions written generations earlier. He insists that the Guptas were destined, marked by fate, their names foreseen in cryptic verses. Villagers lean closer, shivering slightly as he chants of a dynasty that would shine like the midday sun, but one that must guard against the shadow of arrogance. Whether he reads true prophecy or clever poetry is unknown, but it adds a hush of wonder to the morning air. You step away from the crowd for a moment, wandering toward a shaded pavilion. The hum of bees drifts around you, mingling with the distant chants. On the ground, baskets of fruit gleam, pomegranates split open like rubies, bananas golden in the light. Servants pass trays of spiced milk, and honey cakes to guests, the sweet aroma curling into your senses. You take one, the flavor rich and soothing, and feel how celebrations often taste of sweetness in every age. Back at the coronation, ground drums softly sound not war drums, but low rhythms marking dignity. A priest anoints Chandragupta's forehead with sandal paste, cool and fragrant. He is crowned not with iron or gold, but with the blessings of tradition dharma woven into his role as protector of the land. The people bow, and for a fleeting instant unity settles over the gathering like a shawl. Yet the whispers never entirely vanish. A merchant leans against a carved pillar, muttering about rivals to the north, petty kings, who may not bend so easily to Gupta authority. Another wonders if the empire is only a fragile illusion, a tapestry that could unravel at the tug of one thread. Historians today echo that doubt. Some argue the empire was not yet vast, merely strong in the heartland, its power more symbolic than real. Still, you sense how symbols matter. The very act of coronation, the careful coins, minted, the blending of dynasties through marriage, these are stones laid in a foundation. Step by step, brick by brick, an empire begins not only in battle, but in image, in belief, in the quiet weaving of loyalty. Evening falls after the ceremonies. Lanterns flicker in clay dishes, lining pathways like tiny constellations on earth. Musicians pluck the veena, its notes warm and resonant, mingling with the laughter of guests as they linger under the banyan trees. You wander among them, feeling how joy, after ritual, binds communities. In one corner, a storyteller unfurls a tale of Vishnu's avatars, reminding listeners that kings too are guardians sent to maintain cosmic balance. Children's eyes grow wide as he describes the lion-headed Narasimha leaping from stone to save a devotee, and the dwarf Vamana tricking a mighty king with 3 steps. The implication is gentle but clear. Rulers are measured not just by conquests, but by justice and wisdom. Later you gaze upward. The stars are crisp, scattered across the black sky. Farmers and priests alike look to them for guidance, their twinkling patterns tied to harvests, festivals, and omens. Chandragupta, now king, surely gazes at the same heavens, wondering how far his dynasty's reach may stretch. For now, the land rests. The empire is still a seed, but one planted in fertile soil. The coronation fades into memory, but its echoes will ripple forward into alliances, into wars, into the flowering of art and knowledge. You drift on, following those echoes as the sound of temple bells carries softly into the night. You drift onward now, and the morning light catches the figure of Samudragupta, son of Chandragupta, Bud and Kumaradevi. Where his father was remembered for patience and careful alliances, Samudragupta becomes known for his restless energy, his hunger to expand and test the limits of empire. You watch him stand on a broad terrace in Pataliputra, gazing east and west, his mind already plotting campaigns. His name will echo on carved stone pillars, his deeds sung in poetry. But here he is, simply a man preparing for war, dressed in armor that glints faintly in the rising sun. The empire under him begins to change shape. He does not settle for quiet alliances alone. He rides out with armies, elephants, stamping banners, flapping like thunderclouds. The Allahabad pillar inscription carved in Sanskrit tells of his victories, king after king, subdued kingdoms brought to heel. Historians still argue whether the pillar exaggerates, whether Samudragupta's conquests were permanent or fleeting. Some claim it is royal propaganda, more art than fact, while others believe it captures the scale of his ambition truthfully. But as you listen, the ground beneath your feet vibrates with the imagined march of soldiers. You follow his army as it sets out across the Gangetic plain. The roads are dust-choked, lined with villages whose people emerge to watch the spectacle. Elephants sway under heavy howdahs, horses snort impatiently, and drums echo like rolling storms. The air smells of sweat leather and sandalwood oil rubbed on weapons for blessings. Priests walk at the rear, chanting prayers for victory, their voices weaving with the calls of crows circling above. One curious mystical story lingers around Samudragupta. Court poets whisper that he was not only a warrior, but also a musician skilled with the veena. They say that after a day of conquest he would sit quietly, plucking strings beneath the stars, as if to soothe the land itself. Some even claim that when he played, wild animals crept closer, calmed by his melodies, a king's music, taming the world more gently than his sword. Whether true or not, the image softens him, turning the conqueror into a poet. You pass through battlefields now, though they are strangely muted in this telling. Instead of clashing blood and cries, you hear the rumble of elephants, the stamping of feet, the flutter of arrows. You sense the chaos without dwelling on it, letting it wash past you like a storm seen from afar. What lingers more deeply is the aftermath, the silence when the dust settles, the new order imposed, the treaties signed, the rituals of submission in which rival kings bow and offer tribute. At his court, these conquered rulers are sometimes restored to their thrones, bound not by chains but by loyalty and taxes. This strategy keeps the empire wide yet flexible, like a net stretched over turbulent waters. Samudragupta understands that control can mean more than holding land. It can mean holding hearts and obligations. Still you feel the tension. In distant provinces, loyalty may be fragile, a thread that could snap if tugged. Evenings in Pataliputra shift between splendor and shadow. Picture golden lamps casting warm pools of light in palace halls, courtiers praising the emperor's strength, scribes bending over palm leaves to record each conquest. The air carries the scent of sandalwood mixed with smoke from ghee lamps. On one wall, an artist sketches elephants in red pigment, their curved tusks bold against pale plaster, as if to immortalize the empire's power in image. Yet outside the palace gates, ordinary life continues. Farmers tending wheat and rice, potters spinning clay vessels, children skipping along dusty lanes. They know of the king's victories only through rumor songs carried by bards, or the sight of unfamiliar merchants passing through with tribute goods. The empire grows, but daily rhythms remain much the same: sowing, harvesting, praying, storytelling. On some nights, when you walk along the Ganges, the stars shimmer with uncanny brightness. Priests point to constellations interpreting omens for the king. They say Mars burns red with promise of victory, while Saturn's slow crawl warns of patience required. You hear these predictions carried to Samudragupta's ears, and you wonder if he believes them, or if he trusts more in his soldiers' steel. There are debates even today about the true extent of his empire. Did his campaigns sweep across the entire subcontinent, or were they brief raids remembered as greater than they were? Did his influence reach into the south of India, or did those victories dissolve quickly into local resistance? Historians still puzzle, but the poetry carved in stone speaks with confidence. Samudragupta, the exterminator of all kings. And yet in the middle of his warrior's life you find that gentler image again, Samudragupta, with a veena in his lap, strings vibrating under his fingers, the night breeze carrying the music to the riverbanks. Perhaps he played for his own soul, balancing the weight of conquest with melody. Perhaps his music was another kind of conquest, not of land, but of silence. As the moon rises over the plains, you feel the empire stretching wider, its pulse quickening under Samudragupta's rule. The golden dawn you saw earlier now brightens, but with it comes a sharper edge, the knowledge that empires expand not only with peace, but with power. You let the sounds of marching elephants and distant veena notes mingle together, carrying you onward into the growing Gupta world. You follow the widening paths of the empire, tracing how its shape begins to spread across the subcontinent. Maps are rare in this age, yet in your mind's eye you can see the outlines: broad rivers, rugged hills, fertile plains and coastal ports glimmering like jewels along the shoreline. The Gupta realm under Samudragupta and his successors becomes a tapestry stitched together not only by battles, but by the patient threading of trade routes, diplomacy and cultural bonds. You drift along the Ganges, the empire's backbone, its waters both a highway and a lifeline. The river carries boats laden with rice, sugarcane and salt, their sails catching the monsoon winds. Merchants shout across the banks, unloading jars of clarified butter, bolts of cotton cloth and baskets of mangoes. A cow lazily wanders near the riverbank, bells clinking around its neck while children splash in the shallows. You feel the rhythm of commerce, steady and timeless, binding communities to the empire's core. From the river you wander along dusty roads where caravans creak forward, oxen pulling carts heavy with goods. These roads lead to the empire's edges, where tribute flows back toward Pataliputra. Gold coins, elephant sandalwood, and rare spices, tokens of allegiance and wealth. Historians still argue whether the Guptas truly maintained control over such distant regions, or whether local rulers simply paid lip service while keeping their independence. But the perception of unity is powerful, and that perception weaves the land together. One curious tale is told of a jeweled map said to have hung in the Gupta court. Crafted of thin gold sheets, its rivers traced in blue enamel, its mountains in tiny rubies and emeralds, it was said to shimmer like sunlight when torches flickered across it. Some believe it was only a courtly exaggeration, a poetic image meant to impress visitors. Others imagine it might have existed a symbol of the empire's far-reaching vision. Whether real or mythical, the thought of it glimmering in a darkened hall lingers in your mind. As you drift southward in your imagination, you encounter coastal towns buzzing with activity. Sailors prepare ships with stitched plank hulls, their decks piled high with pepper, cinnamon, and silk. The salty air mingles with the scent of fish, drying in net sculls, circling overhead. These ships will ride the monsoon winds west to Africa and east to Southeast Asia, carrying with them not just goods but ideas, stories and music. You realize that the Gupta Empire is not a closed world, but one tied to oceans, its borders extending wherever trade winds blow. Inland mountain passes carve paths into the northwest, linking the empire to Central Asia. Traders here bring horses, jade and furs, their caravans long and weary, their faces weathered by cold winds. At way stations along the routes, monks sit cross-legged offering prayers for safe passage, their chants blending with the clatter of hooves. It is said that sometimes in lonely stretches of desert road, travellers hear ghostly bells, an echo of caravans long vanished. Whether it is memory or imagination, such tales add a mystical edge to the roads of empire. The heart of Gupta power remains in the fertile Gangetic plain, where fields stretch wide and harvests are plentiful. You walk through rows of rice paddies, water glittering under the sun, farmers bent to their work with quiet rhythm. These crops feed not only villages but cities, fueling trade and sustaining armies. The empire's strength rests not only in soldiers and kings, but in the steady hands of countless farmers. In the evenings you pause in towns along the trade routes. Marketplaces glow with oil lamps, stalls crowded with jewels, bangles, carved ivory, and clay pots. A perfume of spices drifts through the air, cardamom, turmeric, cumin, black pepper, and you feel your senses stirred awake. Merchants from distant lands haggle in unfamiliar tongues, their words a mixture of curiosity and competition. The empire hums with exchange, with connection. Yet you sense fragility beneath the flow. Roads wash out in monsoon rains, brigands lurk in forests waiting for caravans, rival kingdoms at the edges strain against Gupta authority. Historians still debate whether the empire was truly centralized or whether it functioned more like a loose confederation. To you drifting along these roads, it feels like a delicate web, strong enough to hold but vulnerable to sudden tears. On a clear night, you sit by a campfire with travelers. One is a Buddhist monk journeying to Nalanda, another a merchant carrying silk from China, another a local farmer taking grain to market. Their stories mingle in the crackling firelight, and you realize that the empire lives in these exchanges, in voices crossing paths. Someone hums a lullaby, its melody, soft and winding, carrying into the dark. As you lean back, the stars spread wide above. You picture the empire beneath them, rivers glinting like silver veins, roads stretching like threads, ports glowing like lanterns along the coast. It feels alive, a breathing organism pulsing with trade, faith and memory. And though debates about its reach and control linger even centuries later in this quiet moment, you let yourself feel the unity, the sense of a land stitched together by river, road and dream. You wander now into the cities themselves, where the empire's pulse beats loudest. The capital of Pataliputra rises before you, sprawling along the riverbank like a living organism, its wooden walls stretching wide, its markets crowded with people of every trade. You pass beneath a carved gateway, stepping onto streets alive with sound, the creak of ox carts, the clink of metalwork, the laughter of children darting between stalls. The smell of roasted grains and spiced lentils drifts from food sellers, mixing with the musk of cattle and the faint perfume of jasmine garlands hung from wooden beams. The city is both ancient and renewed. Once the heart of the Mauryan Empire, it now beats again with Gupta energy. Palaces rise in polished wood and brick adorned with intricate carvings of vines and mythic beasts. You pause by a garden where peacocks strut their feathers shimmering with iridescent blues and greens, and fountains splash softly into lotus ponds. Courtiers wander shaded walkways, their conversations blending with the rustle of silk robes. Inside the palace halls, lamps of ghee cast golden light on polished floors. Courtiers bow as they pass through pillared corridors carrying scrolls, jewelry, and offerings of fruit. Here, debates on law and governance echo, softly voices carrying the weight of empire. Historians still argue whether the Guptas truly maintained a formal bureaucracy like the Mauryans before them, or whether local rulers and guilds handled much of the work. To you, the palace feels both ordered and improvisational, a place where decisions are made, but where the empire's real strength lies in the lives outside its walls. You slip into the bustling marketplace. The air is heavy with scents, incense, turmeric, sesame oil, fresh-cut sugarcane. Stalls overflow with bright textiles, cotton-dyed, in deep indigo silks shimmering like water brocades patterned with golden threads. Jewelers sit cross-legged, chiseling emeralds and sapphires into rings, while blacksmiths hammer swords that ring out sharp and bright. You hear the clamour of bargaining coins, clinking voices rising in protest and laughter. A curious detail catches your eye. In one corner of the bazaar stands a storyteller's booth where a painted cloth hangs like a backdrop. He gestures dramatically, his voice carrying, as he recounts the deeds of Samudragupta. Children gather wide-eyed, clutching sesame sweets, while older listeners nod, half-believing, half-doubting. His words weave history into legend, turning battles into epics. You realize the city itself is a stage where myth and fact dance together daily. You leave the crowded bazaar and wander into residential lanes. Narrow alleys wind between tall wooden houses' balconies draped with drying saris that flutter like banners. Women draw water from communal wells, their bangles jingling as they lift pots onto their hips. The chatter of neighbors flows freely, complaints about grain prices, gossip about royal marriages, laughter over a mischievous child's antics. The city is vast, but each lane feels like its own little village. At night, Pataliputra glows with oil lamps set along the streets. Shadows flicker on painted walls and music drifts from courtyards, venas plucked in gentle rhythm flutes, sighing in soft counterpoint. You pause at a quiet garden where a perfumed breeze stirs the night-blooming jasmine. The hum of the city fades here, and you hear only the trickle of water and the faint cry of nightbirds. One ancient and mystical story whispers through the city. It is said that beneath Pataliputra runs a secret network of tunnels guarded by serpent spirits, the Nagas, who dwell in jeweled palaces under the earth. Some claim the tunnels once allowed kings to escape sieges, others that they lead to hidden treasuries filled with gold and pearls. Whether myth or memory, the thought of such hidden realms makes the ground beneath your feet feel charged with mystery. Beyond Pataliputra, you wander to other cities of the empire, Ujjain, Prayaga, Mathura. Each has its character, Ujjain a hub of astronomy and trade, Prayaga sacred where rivers meet, Mathura alive with art and devotion to Krishna. In every city, markets hum, temples rise, and streets twist with life. You notice how each blends into the empire's fabric, yet retains its own soul. The Guptas understood the value of urban life of cities as both economic engines and cultural hearths. Yet you also see the fragility fires that could sweep through wooden houses, floods that could swell rivers beyond their banks, rival lords who might disrupt trade. Historians still puzzle over how much true control the Guptas exerted over these cities. Were they centrally governed or loosely tied by shared prosperity and respect? As you drift through one last marketplace at dusk, a breeze stirs the scent of sandalwood and sweet-fried pastries. The crowd thins, shopkeepers douse their lamps, and the night slowly wraps the city in a hush. You linger at the edge of a lotus pond, where frogs croak rhythmically, stars glittering above, mirrored in the water. The empire lives not only in kings and conquests, but in these city streets, in the voices of merchants and mothers, in the clatter of coins and the fragrance of jasmine on warm nights. You let the sounds soften around you, the city's heartbeat slowing as you step gently forward, deeper into the Gupta world. You drift beyond the glittering palaces and crowded markets now into the quieter rhythms that shape the empire's days. The Gupta world is not only cities and kings, but countless villages where life follows the steady pulse of sunrise and sunset. You awaken to the sound of roosters crowing, the smell of wood smoke curling up from small hearths, and the sight of farmers stepping barefoot into dew-soaked fields. The day begins with prayer. In courtyards, families gather before small shrines, offering flowers, rice, and water to painted idols of Vishnu, Shiva, or the goddess Durga. Incense curls upward, soft and fragrant, carrying wishes into the morning air. You hear temple bells in the distance, their tones resonating like ripples across the land. The world feels tender in these early hours, like the hush before a song begins. You walk with the farmers as they move into the fields. Their bodies are strong from years of work, their feet calloused from trudging through mud. They guide oxen yoked to wooden ploughs, cutting furrows through the earth as egrets follow behind, snatching at insects stirred from the soil. Rice paddies shimmer in shallow water, reflecting the blue sky like scattered mirrors. Women sing as they plant seedlings, their voices rising and falling in simple melodies that steady their movements. As the sun climbs, the rhythm of labor deepens. Artisans in the village hammer iron tools, spin cotton into thread, or carve intricate wooden toys. Merchants prepare carts loaded with grain, salt, and spices ready to journey along dusty roads. Children help with chores but find time to play, chasing each other with sticks, their laughter rising above the hum of daily tasks. The empire's grandeur may be remembered in inscriptions and temples, but here you see its foundation, the hands of farmers, weavers, and potters. Historians still argue whether the Gupta period was truly prosperous for all, or if peace and abundance mainly touched the wealthy elite. The records praise flourishing trade and bountiful harvests, but the voices of common villagers are mostly lost to silence. Yet in your wandering you sense both contentment and struggle, lives bound to cycles of rain, soil, and survival. A curious and mystical detail emerges from these rural rhythms. In some villages, elders whisper of sacred trees that hold protective spirits. A banyan might be wrapped in red threads, its roots draped with oil lamps, believed to shield the village from illness and famine. Travelers pause to bow before such trees, pressing their palms together in reverence. Whether spirit or symbol, the tree becomes a guardian, its vast canopy, a reminder that nature itself watches over human life. By midday, the heat presses heavy. Families retreat into shaded verandas, fanning themselves with palm leaves. Meals are simple but nourishing: rice lentils spiced with cumin, vegetables cooked in clay pots. You share a bite of flatbread, warm and smoky from the fire, the taste lingering comfortingly. Conversation flows quietly, news of neighbors' prayers for rain, speculation about distant rulers who seem both powerful and far away. Afternoons belong to trade and study. Village squares fill with hawkers selling fresh fruit, sesame sweets, and bright bangles. In shaded courtyards, young students gather around a teacher, listening as he recites verses from the epics. They chant back in rhythm, their voices rising like waves, committing knowledge to memory. You realize education here is oral, carried from teacher to pupil, woven into song and repetition. As dusk approaches, the village hum shifts. Farmers return with weary smiles, cattle shuffle back into pens, and women draw water for evening cooking. The scent of frying spices fills the air, mingling with the sound of drums beating in a temple nearby. You follow the crowd to a small shrine lit by flickering lamps. Priests chant hymns, their voices layered like flowing rivers. The village gathers, faces glowing in the golden light, as if the community itself breathes in harmony for a moment. Night falls softly. Families gather around fires, telling stories passed through generations. Some recount the great deeds of kings, others tell folk tales of animals who speak and trickster gods who laugh. Children fall asleep listening to these tales, their dreams mingling history and myth. You too feel the pull of these stories, their cadence wrapping you like a blanket. Somewhere beyond, in the larger cities, poets and scholars are crafting elaborate works. But here in the countryside, stories remain simple, spoken in the language of daily life. Yet they carry the same power, keeping memory alive, tying people together, giving shape to identity. The stars shimmer above as the village quiets. Dogs bark in the distance, crickets chirp along the fields, and the moon's pale light spreads across the landscape. You walk slowly, feeling the cool earth under your feet, the hush of rest settling over the land. The empire's greatness is not only palaces or victories carved in stone, but the unbroken rhythm of these villages, planting, harvesting, praying, storytelling. It is here, in the simple beat of daily life, that you sense the empire's truest heart, steady and enduring beneath the flow of centuries. You drift onward now, leaving behind the smoke of village hearths and the crowded markets of Pataliputra, until you find yourself lying beneath a vast night sky. The stars shimmer like diamonds scattered carelessly across black silk, and you realize how deeply the people of the Gupta Empire studied these very lights. Astronomy, mathematics, and science, these were not curiosities, but essential keys to understanding time, seasons, and the balance of the cosmos. You imagine yourself seated near an observatory in Ujjain, a city that becomes famous as a hub of celestial study. Scholars gather on stone terraces with palm leaf manuscripts spread before them, whispering calculations while pointing to the heavens. They measure shadows with gnomons, track eclipses, and debate the motions of planets. One figure stands out in memory, Aryabhata, the mathematician and astronomer whose ideas shine like stars themselves. He proposes that Earth spins on its axis, a thought far ahead of its age, though many of his peers cling to older models. Historians still argue whether such revolutionary ideas were accepted widely in his time or dismissed as speculation, but his voice threads through history nonetheless. Closer to your ears, a teacher explains the decimal system using small seeds placed carefully on the ground. 10 of these, he says, becomes one of the next. The concept feels simple to you now, yet in this moment it is fresh and profound. 0, that quiet symbol of nothingness, begins to take shape here in India, its potential waiting to ripple across the world centuries later. The air hums with discovery, as though the numbers themselves vibrate in rhythm with the stars. There is something mystical in the way science and spirituality intertwine. Astrology is studied alongside astronomy horoscopes cast for newborns, kings, and merchants before journeys. A scholar tells you softly that each planet holds not just physical weight but spiritual resonance. Mars burns with warlike energy. Jupiter glows with wisdom. Venus shimmers with love. You gaze upward, imagining the stars as both calculation and divine message, both mathematics and myth. You walk into a quiet courtyard where a stone sundial casts its shadow. A boy runs his hand along its cool surface, marveling at how time itself can be measured by the sun's patient movement. Beside him, his teacher opens a manuscript of medicinal plants, each leaf drawn carefully in ink, its healing properties noted in precise script. The sciences are not separate, but woven together: mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and philosophy, all orbiting one another like planets around the sun. Historians still debate how widely this knowledge reached the common people. Was it confined to scholarly circles and royal courts, or did farmers and artisans benefit from improved calendars, better tools, and medical treatments? You cannot know for certain, but as you wander, you sense knowledge dripping slowly outward, enriching lives in subtle, steady ways. One ancient and curious tidbit tells of a mystical mirror crafted by Gupta artisans, said to reflect not only a person's face but also their fate. Travelers spoke of gazing into it and seeing visions of journeys yet to come, illnesses to avoid, or fortunes waiting on distant shores. Whether such a mirror ever existed or was only a tale spun around firelight, it reveals how the boundary between science and magic was soft, porous, and often beautifully blurred. You return to Ujjain's observatory once more. The scholars lean over tables, chanting numbers in Sanskrit, their voices blending into a kind of music. They plot lunar eclipses, mapping shadows across parchment, then step outside to watch the sky confirm their work. The moment of eclipse comes, the moon, slowly devoured by darkness, then revealed again, and the crowd gasps softly as though the gods themselves had pulled back a curtain to show their theatre of light. Later that evening, you sit by the river with a group of young students. They trace constellations in the sky: the hunter, the swan, the serpent. One points to a bright star and whispers that it guides sailors across oceans. Another insists it is an eye of Vishnu, watching to ensure Dharma holds steady in the world. Both ideas live together side by side without contradiction. As the night deepens, the hum of cicadas rises, the air cools, and the stars seem closer, sharper. You feel yourself drifting in rhythm with them as though your breath matches their patient shimmer. Knowledge here is not a dry thing of numbers and ink, but alive, glowing, infused with wonder. The empire's greatness shines not only in conquest or wealth, but in these moments of discovery, when minds stretch beyond the horizon, when human hands mark the heavens on palm leaves, when the mystery of zero begins to whisper of infinity. You lie back in the grass, lulled by the quiet night, and let the stars carry you further into the Gupta dream. You wander now from observatories and scrolls into the world of colour and stone, where the Gupta Empire breathes through its art. The hum of chisels echoes faintly in your ears as you enter a rock-cut cave, the walls alive with carvings and paintings that shimmer even in dim lamplight. The stone feels cool beneath your fingertips, and you trace delicate lines of figures, dancing gods, descending lovers gazing. This is the Gupta age of sculpture and painting, where form is refined, graceful, almost otherworldly. In temples you see images of Vishnu, Shiva, and the goddess Devi, carved with a softness that suggests movement, a stillness that contains life. Vishnu reclines upon the cosmic serpent, Shesha, his eyes half closed in eternal calm. Shiva dances the Tandava, his limbs whirling in balance between destruction and creation. The stone seems to breathe under your touch, as though the sculptors coaxed spirit into matter. Historians still debate whether Gupta art was the peak of Indian classical style or simply one stage in a longer evolution, but to your eyes it feels timeless, serene, and deeply alive. At Ajanta, the cave walls glow with murals painted in natural pigments, red ochre, lapis blue, malachite green. You pause before a painting of the Bodhisattva Padmapani, his expression tender, his jeweled crown shining against the darkness. The brushstrokes are delicate flowing, and though centuries have passed, the eyes seem to meet yours, calm and compassionate. You feel yourself pulled into his gaze, as if the painting itself whispers softly, "Be still." A curious and mystical tale drifts around these murals. It is said that the artists painted not only with pigments, but with prayers chanting mantras as they brushed each line. Some claimed that the figures would come alive at night, stepping from the walls to continue their divine tasks before dawn. Villagers whispered of faint footprints left near the caves, too small and light to belong to ordinary men. Whether truth or myth, the idea lingers as you look at the luminous faces painted not merely for beauty, but for transcendence. You move on to smaller shrines scattered across the countryside. In village temples, clay idols are molded fresh each season, their painted smiles welcoming worshippers with warmth. In larger cities, pillars rise with carved capitals, lions, elephants, winged creatures, all standing as guardians of sacred space. At Sanchi Stupas echo older traditions, yet Gupta hands renew them with graceful embellishments. The empire balances reverence for the past with a hunger for refinement. Even coins carry artistry. You pick up a Gupta gold dinar, feeling its weight warm in your palm. On one side, Samudragupta stands with a bow poised mid-draw. On another, he strums the veena, captured as warrior and musician, both. These coins are not only currency, but miniature artwork slipping silently through the hands of merchant soldiers and farmers, carrying royal imagery across the land. Art is not confined to stone and gold, it lives in performance too. Picture dancers in flowing garments, their anklets ringing as they move in rhythm with drums. Their hands form mudras, each gesture, speaking silently of God's heroes and cosmic truths. The audience sways entranced, the night lit by torches, shadows leaping on the walls as though the dance extends beyond the stage. Historians still puzzle over how widely art reached everyday people. Was it a privilege of courts and monasteries, or did its essence filter into every village festival, every painted clay pot? You sense it everywhere, even in small details, patterns on textiles, carvings on doorways, songs sung to lull children asleep. Art in the Gupta age is not an ornament, but a breath present in every corner. In the stillness of a cave shrine, you pause one last time. The air is cool damp with centuries of silence. Your torchlight catches a painting half faded, yet the curve of a smile remains. The artist is gone, the dynasty too, yet the expression still holds a fragment of joy suspended across time. You close your eyes and imagine the painter's brush moving his quiet chant, echoing the flicker of lamplight reflecting on wet pigments. When you step outside, the night is deep and fragrant. The moon casts silver light on stone temples, and you hear the faint sound of drums from a distant village festival. The air itself seems painted layered with texture and glow. You feel that the Gupta Empire lives most vividly in these moments of beauty, sculpted, sung and painted into memory. You let that beauty settle in your heart as you drift forward deeper into the dream where faith and thought are waiting to meet you. You move softly into courtyards where lamps gutter and sandals line up by doorways where the air smells of oil ink and the faint sweetness of crushed jasmine. You settle along the edge of a cloister and listen, low voices careful as raindrops shaping questions that have travelled many lifetimes. The empire hums with faith and philosophy, and tonight you eavesdrop on it all. Hindu pundits with polished palm leaf manuscripts, Buddhist monks with ochre robes, folded like sunrise, Jain mendicants stepping lightly so as not to harm even an ant that crosses their path. You breathe more slowly, without being told, to letting the cadence of their arguments become your lullaby. A conch sounds at a nearby Vishnu shrine, its spiral note rolling like the sea. Priests move past you carrying plates of flowers and clarified butter, their foreheads cool with sandal paste. You glimpse the four-armed figure in the Garbhagriha, the temple's womb Vishnu, gazing outward with a calm that feels older than stone. Outside, a storyteller murmurs of kings who keep order because dharma must be upheld, because the cosmic fabric frays if justice loosens. And you remember a coin you held earlier, Samudragupta's Ashvamedha, type the sacrificial horse, and the queen beside the post, a small, shining reminder that ritual and rule play together in this age. That is a plain historical fact. Samudragupta proclaims the horse sacrificed the old Vedic rite, riding into the Gupta present on gold. But you follow the conch note into study halls where debate is the true ceremony. Under a moon-pale courtyard, a teacher of Nyaya taps a reed against a tablet. Perception, inference, comparison testimony he prompts, and students chant the four pramanas of knowing. They argue about how a pot is known, how smoke implies fire, how words fasten to things. A name you've heard in whispers moves through the room. Vatsyayana, whose commentary on the Nyaya Sutra sharpens the craft of reasoning in this very period. Across the colonnade, a philosopher of Sankhya traces 25 tattvas in dust with the edge of his palm, the elements, the senses, mind, intellect, and that luminous witness within Purusa which only watches. Someone asks whether there must be a Lord beyond the counting. Another insists the counting is enough. Historians still argue whether Sankhya in this era acknowledges a personal God or keeps the cosmos elegantly self-running the debate, as delicate as breath on glass. At the far end of the courtyard, the grammar sage clears his throat. Words, he says, are not mere labels, they shimmer. He recites lines that will later be gathered in the Vakyapadya, and you feel a door-opened speech as a single pulse, shabda, bursting into meanings like sparks from a struck flint. Students close their eyes to hear it better. If you've ever sat with a favorite podcast and rewound the same beautiful sentence just to taste it again, you understand this moment. The pleasure of thought can be quiet and delicious. A bell tinkles and you drift toward a Buddhist vihara. In the refectory's soft clatter bowls meet wooden tables, then the hall empties into calm. Two monks unroll a manuscript, voices a hush. One speaks for Yogacara, mind only, the world like a reflection in a still pool. The other answers from Abhidharma analysis, counting and classifying experience as carefully as a goldsmith weighs dust. They bow to one another after each reply. You hear the name Vasubandhu cross their lips, the great scholar whose treatises bend minds toward subtler seeing. A novice at the door asks almost shyly whether one can awaken while still wearing the dust of ordinary life. The elder smiles, says that the lotus rises from mud, not marble. You tuck that answer away like a smooth stone. Farther along the road, you step where the night smells faintly of neem, and the earth still holds the day's warmth. A Jaingani, a leader of mendicants, answers a merchant's questions with a patience that seems carved from sandalwood. He speaks of ahimsa, non-violence, not as a rule, but a rhythm of seeing anekantavada, many-sidedness, the humility to admit that truth has more facets than our eyes can count. He turns a simple clay cup in his hands and says, "From one view, this cup is empty. From another, it is full of air. From another, it is the shape of a future drink." You feel your shoulders drop the tight lines of certainty, smoothing out like silk under a warm iron. Along the empire's arteries, river Ghats monastery courts, temple libraries, you notice how patronage flows. Land grants inscribed on copper plates promise villages and revenues to Brahmins who keep ritual fire alive. Sometimes the same script grants groves to Buddhist monasteries or shelters to Jain congregations. The Gupta seal often bears a Garuda, the eagle vehicle of Vishnu, and court poets sing Vaishnava hymns. Yet the hands of kings also set roofs over many schools of thought. Historians still argue whether this tolerance was deep conviction or pragmatic statecraft, whether pluralism was principle or policy. You feel listening that motives mix like spices, distinct yet inseparable once they heat. Rumour clings to the night like mist. You hear that Nalanda, the great Buddhist Mahavihara, is seeded in this very era, linked by tradition to Kumaragupta, its early buildings rising amid mango groves. Students, they say, come from as far as Kucha and Khotan, their speech thick with desert winds, to sit at the feet of teachers who can turn a thought into quiet lightning. Another voice counters that the dates blur, that foundations harden later, that epigraph and story don't always clasp hands. Historians still argue whether Nalanda's founding is firmly Gupta or just leaning on Gupta light, and you accept the uncertainty as you would a soft pillow. It holds your head without demanding an answer. Here and there the mystical sidles in without apology. A temple attendant tells you about a thread-bound palm leaf in the sanctum, inscribed only with the sacred syllable Om. He insists that in the deepest hours before dawn, when the wind forgets to breathe, that single sign hums audibly, as if the universe itself were clearing its throat. Sailors claim to carry tiny copper plates stamped with the syllable. They swear the plates warm in the hand when storms gather beyond the horizon. Perhaps it is only body heat and fear. Perhaps the world does sing to those who listen. You let the possibility glow and don't press it too hard. Dawn drips from the eaves and debate softens into devotion. Women lay marigold chains along a Shiva linga beaded with water. Monks step in file to beg their alms with eyes lowered and hearts unstartled. A Jain ascetic traces a slow path out of town with a broom of peacock feathers sending tiny lives safely aside. You notice how easily practiced braids with thought, how a ritual gesture answers a metaphysical claim, how a vow tethers a philosophy to the ground. The Gupta world is a fabric, and you can't tug one thread without feeling the rest tremble. Even you, passing through like a quiet breeze, begin to carry the habits of listening. You say less. You let questions bloom and fall back like waves that never worry about the shore. Somewhere a priest reads from the Upanishads. From the unreal lead me to the real. And perhaps the monk next door hears the same plea in Pali, and the Jain hears it in the silent commitment not to harm. Historians still argue whether this age deserves the phrase classical, and whether the harmony we imagine is more mosaic than mirror, more negotiated than given. But as you leave the courtyards, your breath and the world's breath keep time. The conch calls again, the first birds answer, and the city stirs. You walk on with the gentlest kind of certainty, the kind that doesn't narrow your eyes. Your steps fall light, as though you have been taught by the softest teachers, those who argue like water and pray like dawn. You notice the hush at a throne room doorway where anklets chime like tiny bells, and you step in slowly so you won't scatter the moment. A queen sits at council sari, edged in gold thread fingers, resting on a copper plate grant as if testing its weight. She doesn't raise her voice. She listens. A minister traces tax lines on a palm leaf, a priest murmurs about auspicious hours, and the queen's gaze moves between them steady as a lamp that refuses to flicker even when the wind remembers its tricks. One name rises like a clear bell, Prabhavat Gupta, daughter of Chandragupta II. Married into the Vakataka house in the Deccan, she serves as regent when her husband dies, ruling while her sons are young. Copper plate charters carry her seal, villages and revenues pass at her command. That is a plain historical fact you can run your hand along like carved stone. A Gupta princess governs, and the Deccan listens. You picture her court under mango-shade scribes, scratching Sanskrit across gleaming copper while messengers wait with reins in restless hands. The queen leans forward and signs her name, and the courtyard changes temperature by a breath. Closer to the Ganges, another object glints in your palm, an early Gupta gold coin with Chandragupta Y and Kumaradev side by side, the queen named with the king. The joint portrait feels deliberate, the metal announcing alliance more clearly than any rumor. You turn the coin and think about how currency carries memory better than breath. Every market stall, every ferry toll, every quiet hand-to-hand exchange repeats her presence without needing a bard. Historians still argue whether such images reflect genuine shared authority or ceremonial symbolism. But for you, the effect is simple and sure. The queen is there everywhere, in 1,000 small exchanges like a pinned comment that never slips down the page. Names cluster like jasmine on a braid. You hear of Dattadeva linked with Samudragupta, and Dhruvadeva remembered with Chandragupta the second mother to the next king. Some women speak policy in open court, others nudge it in quieter rooms, choosing which petitions rest on a cushion instead of the floor, which messenger warms his hands nearest the brazier, which shrine receives lamp oil this season. Influence has its own perfume. You notice it most just after someone leaves the room. Beyond palaces, you find learning and women seated inside it. In a shaded pavilion, a teacher unrolls a manuscript of Kavya, while students, boys and girls, sit cross-legged in a ring. A girl repeats a verse, smile crinkling her eyes, then pulls the metaphor, clean from its ornament like a mango from its stone. The teacher's laugh is unguarded. You think of Kalidasa's heroines, Shakuntala, with her poised tenderness, Malavika, dancing into a king's attention, and you notice how deftly the poet gives interior weather to women, not just ornament. The breeze carries the faint smell of ink and oil. Someone hums a line until it settles in the ear, the way a tune does when you loop a favorite track on your phone. Another courtyard holds a different curriculum. A grandmother recites the arithmetic of daily life for a circle of girls, grain measures market rates, the calm math that keeps a pantry honest. She climbs the decimal ladder with lentils. 10 black grams become 1. White stone, 10 stones become a chalk mark on the wall. She taps a tiny chest that clicks open. Bracelets clack softly inside. Stridan, she says, the property a woman keeps. Law books may narrow or widen those rights by line and loophole, but here the knowledge is practical and warm as a fire, what is saved, what is gifted, what is held in trust for a different season. At dawn you pass a monastery refectory and watch ochre robes flow like a slow river. Among the bowls and steam are shaved heads that are not all men's. A cluster of nuns takes alms with lowered eyes. A traveller from China, careful steps, wine-burned face, writes of monasteries busy with learning and charity, of women within the Sangha walking the same pre-dawn paths. Whether those notes describe the whole land or only bright pockets is hard to fix, but the footprints on the threshold are the same dust as everyone's, and the bowl is just as empty before it is filled. You follow them out into the pale light and listen to the wooden clack of doors as they close behind you, soft as the paws of a night animal. Courtyards turn to workshops. In an indigo-dyed room, a textile guild weighs skeins of silk. The forewoman tests the twist with 2 fingers and snaps a thread to hear whether it sings clean. In a jeweller's lane, a craftswoman holds a minute chisel like a second heartbeat, setting a garnet into hammered gold. Her nose ring winks, her gaze does not lift. A potter's daughter stamps repeating lotus patterns around a bowl's lip and grins when the rhythm lands just right. You realize that guilds breathe like choirs, 100 small breaths making one steady note. Evening remakes the street into a stage, and storytellers claim their hour. A woman with henna'd palms stands before a painted cloth of forests and hermitages. She chants the Ramayana in a lilting cadence, learned from her mother before that. Children lean against their father's knees, old men tug white shawls tighter. The drum keeps time like a drowsy heart. When she reaches Esther's trial by fire, she pauses long enough for the night to breathe, and a baby who has been fretting gives up and sleeps. Historians still argue whether such public performance by women was common practice or cherished exception, but the faces in this crowd aren't counting precedent. They're drinking the voice that carries courage and grief in the same cup. Mystery keeps slipping its foot over the threshold and refuses to be shooed. In a shrine to the goddess Durga Amba, names like rivers, the priestess ties a thin red thread around your wrist and whispers that the knot can hear vows. She sets a clay lamp afloat on a shallow bowl of water. The flame steadies, then seems to grow when the doors close and the room holds its breath. People say the goddess favors those who braid hair for the tired and feed the neighbor's child, that the smallest kindness invites the fiercest protection. Somewhere, a midwife keeps a tiny silver hairpin wrapped in cloth, sworn to ward off the evil eye, passed from hand to hand, like a secret that knows every cradle in town. Meanwhile, law and custom cross like monsoon winds. Smarty texts sketch roles with tidy certainty. Inscriptions speak more messily of gifts made by queens of land, granted by daughters of communities that accept what works. Historians still argue whether these centuries tightened patriarchal scripts or loosened them through prosperity and plural practice. You notice both truths walking side by side, the seclusion of some courtyards, the open doorways of others. The bride who lowers her eyes at morning writes the widow who manages a shop with a ledge-worn abacus and a voice that means business. Night settles and you climb a palace stair. A queen listens while a court poet praises another woman's wit. She laughs and rewards the verse anyway. In a village lane, two sisters share a bowl of tamarind and trade advice like bangles. In a vihara cell, a nun copies a text until the lamp gutters, then sits very still and watches her breath behave. The empire you have been tracing is threaded with women you cannot possibly count, named and nameless, crowned and barefoot, speaking in halls and whispering in kitchens, holding law in one hand and lullabies in the other. When you leave the throne room doorway, the anklets chime again behind you. The sound is small and bright. It follows you down the corridor, out through the painted gate, and into the warm dark where the river holds its breath before deciding which bank to kiss. You step lightly, aware that half the footsteps in this world do not announce themselves and that history often hears them anyway if you lean close and listen. You step off the paved road, and the sound of wheels fades until only cicadas and your own breath remain. The path curls through sal and teak, soft with fallen leaves, and the air smells of damp bark and a hint of ash. Before long, you reach a clearing where a few low huts face a fire that has been tended so carefully it seems to sleep rather than burn. Men and women in plain cloth sit in a loose circle, spines, long eyes half-lidded. Their teacher's hair is matted like vine, his voice slow as riverbed silt. He speaks of breath, moving in subtle channels of attention poured so steadily into the present that time forgets to scratch at the door. You watch your own inhale lengthen without effort, like a tide that knows how to return. These are the siddhas in the stories people tell, accomplished ones, wandering practitioners who greet the world with eyes the color of dawn and patience that can boil water. Some wear rudraksa beads dark as seeds, others paint ash lines across their foreheads, a reminder that all forms will one day loosen. They speak lightly of powers you half believe, hearing conversations across valleys growing light as a bird's bone warming the body in winter winds with nothing but will. They do not offer demonstrations, they set a pot to simmer and listen to it with the same interest they give the moon. Historians still argue whether such Siddhi tales begin in this era or crystallize later, whether Gupta centuries already hold the template of tantric wonder or whether the full ritual architectures bloom after. You let the uncertainty sit like tea leaves at the bottom of a cup, suggesting flavors without insisting which. Toward evening, a mendicant arrives with a bundle that clinks. When he unties the cloth, you glimpse tiny retorts, clay crucibles blackened with use, and a packet of powders that glitter faintly. He says little, but the hut fills with the clean mineral tang of ground mica and the lemon-bitter breath of sulfur. Here, alchemists Rasavardins lean over small fires and coax mercury to dance, trying to marry it with sulfur until it stills, or feed it herbs until it behaves like an obedient river. Sometimes they aim at medicine basmas, carefully calcined ash of metals, stirred into ghee or honey for strength and balance. Sometimes quietly, bravely, they aim at gold. You watch the flame tremble as a drop of liquid metal skitters across a plate and refuses to be caught, a tiny moon escaping fingers. A boy grins, an old woman shakes her head, reminding him that Rasayana is first a path of renewal, not greed, and that a long, clear mind is worth more than a bright coin. A story drifts around the fire while water murmurs in an earthen pot, a lamp hidden deep in a cave that has burned for years without oil, tended by no hands. Some call it a trick of airflow and stalactites weeping mineral tears. Others say a mantra keeps it fed, the flame remembering syllables like food. The teller's voice drops lower, and the forest seems to lean in. Whether physics or faith, the image holds you a patient light that never asks for applause. You travel on, and stone begins to stand where trees had been. At Udayagiri near Vidisha, the hill is carved with doorways like dark eyes, and from one wall a great boar rises, muscles rippling from the cliff. It is Varaha, Vishnu's boar form, lifting the drowning earth Bhudeva from the cosmic flood. The figure is so massive you feel small in the most comfortable way. Your worries shrunk to the size of a dropped seed. Nearby, an inscription names Chandragupta II, and the 5th century date steps forward like a bowing host. This is a plain historical fact that you can touch with your palm, king-carving era woven together. Monks pass by in single file. A family presses their foreheads to the stone. A guard shuffles his feet and smiles. You notice how royal power and sacred narrative meet here like two rivers that choose to share a bed. Night settles on the hill, and a wind slips through the cuts in the rock, singing a thin note. Someone murmurs of a sage who meditated here until his pulse thinned, who was fed by wild bees that laid honey on his lips each dawn. A child licks a fingertip of honey offered at the shrine and decides to believe forever. You remember a modern trick, a 10-minute phone timer you use when you want to read without doom scrolling, and you realize it feels like a lazy descendant of these older disciplines, attention-trained, not tensed, until it sits at your heel like a friendly dog. Across the plains, legends keep pace with the night. In bazaars and on ferries, people swap tales of a king called Vikramaditya, who outwits a Vatala, a clever spirit with a habit of answering questions, with more questions in a cremation ground full of batwing shadows. Some say Vikramaditya is a title of Chandragupta II, some insist he is a braid of many rulers, stitched into one bright figure by storytellers who love neat lines. Historians still argue whether the famous Vikramaditya maps cleanly to a Gupta king or is a literary composite who borrowed Gupta light after the fact. You picture the king in lamplight pausing between riddles, and you enjoy the story even more because the truth won't sit still. By a riverbank you meet a woman who draws a diagram on packed earth with rice paste triangles nested in circles, a petalled gate opening toward the center. She sets a copper coin at the heart and hums a scale no instrument taught her. She says a yantra is a map the mind can walk, and that names don't matter if the steps are careful. A boatman watches from his rope and slips a small amulet back under his shirt, a hammered plate etched with a syllable tight as a seed. When storms pile up over the monsoon sea, he swears the metal warms against his skin. Maybe it is fear and sweat and faith running the same current. Maybe the world does answer when asked politely. On a dusty monastery shelf you find a palm leaf that lists simple observances, vows tighter than bracelets, speak true harm, none keep the senses clean, watch the breath like a little bird in the hand. Next to it another leaf catalogues herbs that gleam in dew, at dawn amla guduchi brahmi, with notes on how to stir them into tonics that thicken sleep and sweeten memory. A monk smiles when you raise an eyebrow. He says body and mind are neighbors, and it is rude to visit one and ignore the other. Far off, a hermit with a laugh like dry grass takes you to a low cave and lets you sit where the stone remembers heat from years of practice. He tells no doctrine, he asks no fee. He says that most powers worth having are quiet, the ability to choose your next word to notice when anger is thirsty, and offer it water to keep kindness awake when the room gets loud. He taps the ground once, as if to wake something under it, and then swats a mosquito away without killing it. You do not know whether that counts as magic. You are sure it counts for more than the bright tricks. On the road back, children chase you, throwing questions like pebbles in a shallow stream. Can saffron really dye the soul? Do ghosts enjoy riddles? Does breath have a color? You answer with stories that leave space around the edges. The moon climbs the tamarind tree like a careful cat. Somewhere a conch blows. Somewhere a drum answers. The forest closes the door gently behind you, and the path becomes a line of cool dust under your feet, guiding you steady as a mantra that has forgotten how to hurry. You follow the faint conch note through thinning trees until a line of lamp-lit arches appears, their shadows pooling like cool water on polished stone. The forest hush carries you into a sabha, a hall of discussion where cushions wait in a circle, and palm leaf manuscripts rest like sleeping birds' wings tied with red thread. You slip to the edge, draw your breath down into your belly, and let the soft scrape of reed pens and the low rise and fall of voices become for a while the whole weather of your mind. The first voice you meet is measured bright and exacting. A grammarian taps a stylus on his knee and names the steps by which language stands up and walks soundword, sentence meaning. He speaks of roots and affixes as if he's describing gears in a fine watch, then gestures towards something subtler, the sudden wholeness of a sentence arriving all at once, a flash the later tradition will call sphota. Across from him, a philosopher of Mimamsa clears his throat and smiles, insisting that meaning grows from usage as vines climb a trellis steadily publicly without miracles. You taste the pleasure of good disagreement, no heat, just light. A clerk enters with copper plates glinting like small sunrise, and you remember a plainer fact that sits steady in your palm under the Gupta's inscriptions bloom in polished Sanskrit, not only in the Prakrits that had sung on stone before. Court language shifts like a river changing channels, and poets paddle fast to keep up. The clerk sets the plates beside a veena. You notice how governance and grammar share a tabletop without getting in one another's way. The talk turns toward poetry, and the room softens as if a window has opened. A court reader takes up a palm leaf and begins a sloping, honeyed cadence. A cloud drifts south toward longing. A lover speaks to a yaksa from exile. A city's lamps bloom like stars on water. You know the music without needing the name, but the name comes anyway. Kalidasa. Plays and poems Shakuntala, with its lost ring and found memory Raghuvamsha, with its kingly line like a river of duty Meghaduta, with its monsoon messenger, are spoken as if they were warm bread passed by hand. Historians still argue whether Kalidasa sat in the court of Chandragupta II or of Kumaragupta, whether he walked in the early 5th century or a little later, and whether the famous 9 gems at Vikramaditya's court are history or a garland braided by later fancy. You don't mind the blur. The verses land clear as rain on dust. In a corner, a dramatist unrolls a painted stage, plan a rectangle of cloth, 2 doorways, the hint of a forest, the Natya Shastra's old instructions breathing through a fresh evening. A dancer flexes her hands and makes a deer from fingers. A musician tunes to a scale that feels like dusk leaning against a wall. Someone debates rasa. This scene, is it Shringara, love, or Karuna pathos? Or can a single line carry both, like a coin pressed between 2 thumbs? A student proposes hasya laughter because a child in the audience will giggle at the squirrel that won't quit chasing its tail by the prop tree. The teacher nods. Refined sentiment can hold simple delight without cracking. You nod too. Your favorite shows do this all the time, letting comedies slip a hand through tragedy's elbow so the walk home doesn't feel endless. Across the circle, a lexicographer slides a neat pile of leaves into view. He is building a treasury of words, he says, synonyms gathered like grains in a granary, so poets can measure out precisely what their lines can carry. A whisper moves Amarasimha and his Amarakokisha, the immortal lexicon, the kind of book that outlives fashions and rulers because it teaches you how to choose. Historians still argue whether Amarasima truly belonged to a Gupta court or to a slightly later light, but everyone here borrows his buckets when they need to haul meaning across a room. The debate sharpens to Mita Chanda's little stairs, the voice climbs to reach the roof of memory. One scholar claps a pattern into the night, ta-ta-ta in ta-ta-ta, Mandakranta's gentle swell, and you recognize the gait of Meghaduta's cloud. Another argues for Shloka's sturdy couplet, the farmer's bullock cart, of verse reliable on any road. A third insists that Vasantatilaka carries spring in the arrangement of its feet like jasmine hidden at the wrist. They draw the beats as dots with charcoal and the floor becomes a drum you can see. A curious detail drifts across the cushions, half murmured, half smiled some scribes. It said, "Make ink on nights when the moon is a thin cradle-grinding lamp black with rainwater caught from the first monsoon, and a drop of sesame oil blessed at dawn, because words set down with such ink are reluctant to fade." A librarian swears the oldest copies keep their gloss like a secret pact. You roll the superstition in your mouth like a seed, whether chemistry or charm the pages in your lap do gleam a little in the lamplight. Soon the philosophers reclaim the floor. A Nyaya logician sets up a 5-part syllogism as neatly as a merchant lays wares. Thesis, reason, example application, conclusion. Smoke over that hill, he says. Where there's smoke, there's fire. The kitchen hearth is the example. Thus the hill burns. A skeptic bows and asks whether the smoke might be dust and the hill baked, but not a flame. Laughter ripples friendly as a shoulder squeeze. A Sankhya teacher sketches the 25 tattvas again on a tray of rice, then blows gently so that only Purusa the witness remains visible as a single grain in the center. A Vedantin hums a line from the older Upanishads and lets it ring, "You are that." Silence follows the way gulls follow a boat. Law finds its moment. A jurist lifts a smarty and reads on inheritance, on contracts sealed with a knot in a cord, on fines for false weights in markets bright with sugar. Another counters with Customakara the law lived daily that sometimes reroutes the law written. They agree more often than not, but when they don't, you can feel a dynasty learning how to bend without breaking. Historians still argue whether Gupta administration codified centrally like the Mauryans or trusted guilds and local elites to keep the gears greased. The charters and coin hoards and tidy ruins give mixed testimony like witnesses who saw the same moon from different courtyards. You watch copyists at the edge of the light, their styluses ticking like quiet rain. Each leaf they finish they dust with fine sand stack under a smooth board and tie with thread that smells faintly of camphor. A boy presses his ear to a closed bundle and swears he can hear a poem breathing inside, as if the syllables keep small pets that must be fed with attention. The librarian doesn't deny it. He tells the boy to come at dawn and help air the stack so the bookworms don't feast. Mystical or mundane, you like the idea that pages are alive and prefer fresh air. Outside, the night breeze combs the banyan leaves. Inside, the circle widens and contracts minds, leaning and returning like tides that have memorized the shore. Someone recites a verse that fits into the room as neatly as a lamp into its niche. Someone else contradicts a beloved teacher and is invited to tea tomorrow, not exile. You realize you've been breathing with the group in through the assertion, out through the reply, a soft pranayama of thought. The Guptas will be remembered for coins and conquests for temples and trade, but the halo around your head just now is made from quieter or disagreements that polish agreements, that don't flatten questions, that land like birds and are allowed to sit. Before you rise, the musician plucks a single line on the Veena Sa, and you feel the pitch lock the room together the way a tuning note locks a choir. The lamp wobbles once, then steadies. You slip back through the arches, the cool floor passing under your feet like a deliberate sentence, subject-verb, release. The forest receives you again with the smell of leaf and night water. Thought has its own cradle song here, and you let it carry you down the path, body light, mind unhurried, the debates still speaking softly inside your ribs as if they plan to keep watch while you sleep. You follow the debates out of the lamplit halls and onto roads that stretch far beyond the Empire's heartland. The sky above is streaked with dawn, and the smell of salt drifts faintly, even though the sea is still many days away. Traders are already on the move, ox carts creaking with bales of cotton bullocks, snorting drivers humming tunes to keep time with their steps. The Gupta world is not closed within itself. It breathes through trade winds, through caravans and ships that carry spices, stories, and silk. On the northern roads you pass caravans heavy with horses, fine steeds from Central Asia, their manes braided, their breath pluming in the cold. Merchants offer bolts of Chinese silk, shining as if woven from water, and lapis stones as blue as a midnight sky. Southward carts groan with pepper and cardamom, their scent so sharp it tickles your nose. At the western ports you hear sailors shouting in tongues you half recognize and half don't, Persian, Greek, Tamil, and voices from Africa's coast. Historians still argue how much of this trade the Gupta state controlled directly and how much was left in the hands of guilds and merchants. But whichever answer is truer, the flow itself is undeniable goods. People and ideas move ceaselessly, tying the subcontinent to far-away lands. You reach the port of Barak on the Arabian Sea, and the air vibrates with commerce. Warehouses smell of salt and spice. Ropes creak as ships are loaded with sesame oil, rice, cotton, and ivory. In return come amphorae of Mediterranean wine-glass beads shimmering in sunlight, and gold coins stamped with foreign emperors. You watch one coin tumble in a merchant's palm, the profile of a Roman ruler staring blankly far from home, now just another currency in Indian markets. It is a plain fact Roman gold flowed into India for pepper and silk, and even in Gupta times, echoes of that old trade still ring. The ships themselves are marvels, stitched plank vessels sealed with pitch sails patched, but strong prows painted with eyes to see the sea's moods. The sailors wait for the southwest monsoon winds that will carry them toward Arabia and Africa. They trust the stars, the smell of the sea, and a lore passed mouth to ear for generations. Some carry amulets etched with fish symbols believed to calm storms. One man swears that if you whisper the name of Varuna, Lord of Waters, into a conch shell and toss it overboard, the waves grow gentle. Mystical or not, the sea itself feels alive, heaving and breathing under moonlight. Further east, in ports along the Bay of Bengal, ships leave for golden lands, Suvarnabhumi, as ancient texts call them. Sailors speak of Sumatra, of Java, of kingdoms where Indian merchants and monks bring not just goods, but Sanskrit words, epics, and gods. Imagine bales of cotton unloaded beside statues of Vishnu, scrolls of Buddhist sutras passed with silk bolts. A boy stares at a painted image of the Buddha and copies it into wet sand with his finger, the sea foam slowly erasing it. You realize how easily stories travel tucked among peppercorns and rice sacks. Back inland you pause at a caravanserai, a resting place along the trade route. Merchants lounge on mats sipping buttermilk while guards sharpen spears. In the corner, a bard sings of faraway markets where Gupta gold is weighed against frankincense and pearls. You listen to his words drift into silence, then to the crunch of grain fed to camels in the courtyard. Even resting the road hums. A curious tidbit emerges from the talk around the fire somewhere in the south. Sailors whisper of a jeweled island guarded by serpents that appears only when the monsoon moon is at its thinnest. Those who land there, they say, return with sacks of rubies that glow faintly in the dark. Others insist no such place exists, that it is only the invention of weary sailors longing for treasure. Still, the story clings like salt to the skin carried from port to port, embroidered a little more each time. By evening you find yourself in Ujjain, a city at the crossroads of land trade. Here, guilds of merchants regulate markets with care. They set fair weights, lend money, and build temples as acts of devotion and reputation. One guild of silk traders funds the carving of a temple pillar, their names etched carefully on its base. Another sets up a water tank for weary travelers. You notice how commerce and piety fold together, each transaction carrying both profit and blessing. Historians still puzzle whether this prosperity reached every tier of society or whether wealth concentrated in guild leaders and royal coffers. Some argue that booming trade only deepened inequalities. Yet walking through these streets you see generosity too, alms given at monasteries, endowments for schools, charity wells dug for the poor. Perhaps like trade itself, prosperity flows unevenly, spilling wide at times, pooling narrowly at others. Night falls and you sit near the port again, listening to waves slap wooden hulls. The scent of pepper hangs heavy, mixed with tar and smoke. Sailors sing in rough voices their songs, simple, steady, meant to keep rhythm when pulling ropes. Above, constellations blaze guides for voyages stretching across black seas. You tilt your head back and think of merchants, monks, and mariners carrying India outward and the world flowing back in. The Gupta Empire, you realize, is not bounded by its maps alone. It stretches with every ship's wake, with every caravan's dust, with every new word traded across tongues. You close your eyes, rocked by the imagined tide, letting the ocean itself lull you deeper into the empire's dream. You stand now at the empire's edge, where the roads that once thrummed with tribute and spices begin to quiet. The air carries a faint chill, and in the villages you notice fewer garlands strung, fewer lamps burning late into the night. Rumors travel faster than caravan stories of horsemen pressing at the borders of court intrigue, where whispers sting sharper than arrows. The Gupta world, so full of light, begins to cast long shadows. Historians still argue about when decline truly began. Some place it in the later 5th century, when Skanda-Gupta fought off the Huna's fierce invaders from the northwest. Inscriptions tell of his defense, his armies clashing with wave after wave of mounted warriors, their arrows darkening the sky. He is praised as a savior of the realm, a king who stood firm when the frontiers cracked. But those same inscriptions also carry a different note, the strain of endless battle, the cost of defense. Fields abandoned, revenues, strained repairs postponed. Victory feels less like triumph and more like exhaustion. You walk through a garrison town where weary soldiers oil their bows. Their eyes are sharp, but their sandals are worn, their rations thin. A smith hammers dented armor and mutters that iron cannot be mended as quickly as it is broken. The sound of steel rings through the twilight, steady but tired. A plain historical fact stands before you. By the late 5th century, Huna invasions were a real, relentless pressure gnawing at the empire's strength. Even within the core you sense fraying. At Pataliputra, courtiers bicker over taxes and guilds struggle with disruptions in trade. The gold dinars that once gleamed with fine artistry grow cruder, thinner, as though prosperity itself is being clipped. Some scholars suggest this reflects a decline in the empire's wealth. Others argue it could be regional mints improvising. Historians still debate whether these coins are sure signs of collapse or merely a transition, but in your palm they feel lighter, less certain. In temples the lamps still burn, but with fewer offerings piled before them. Priests murmur prayers to keep the gods attentive, yet you sense a quiet worry in their voices. At a marketplace, a merchant complains that caravans no longer arrive as swiftly, that sea trade falters when roads grow unsafe. A potter whispers that her son has gone north to fight and has not returned. The empire still breathes, but its breath is shallow, uneven. Amid this uncertainty, curious and mystical tales emerge. People say omens flicker in the sky, comets trailing long tails like swords, eclipses stretching too long. An old monk recalls a night when the river itself seemed to retreat, pulling back as though in fear, only to surge again with a roar. Villagers interpret it as the earth's own sigh at the empire's troubles. Whether natural or supernatural, these stories cling to memory like burrs on cloth. You continue wandering and reach a countryside where once busy villages now feel hushed. Roofs sag, irrigation channels crack. Weeds creep where rice once grew. Farmers still sing, but their voices are thinner like threads fraying at the edges of a garment. You sit among them as they share a simple meal of coarse grain and sour milk. The taste is sharp, the silence after heavier. Somewhere along the northern frontier, fires burn on the horizon. You hear riders gallop past at dawn, their cloaks snapping, their faces hidden by fur-lined helmets. Hunas scouts of greater forces. They vanish into the dust, leaving only hoofprints and the smell of sweat and iron. The empire stretches to stop them, but each clash leaves deeper wounds, yet decline is never only about enemies. Court poets still compose verses, but their lines carry melancholy, praising kings who defend rather than expand, who preserve rather than innovate. Guilds still meet, but more to argue over shrinking resources than to plan new ventures. Some copper plates record desperate grants of land gifts meant to hold loyalty even as the royal treasury thins. Historians still argue whether this unraveling was sudden collapse or long erosion. Did the Hunas tear the fabric swiftly, or did neglect and division wear it down thread by thread? You sense it was both storms outside, slow, fraying within. Empires seldom end in one night. They fade, flicker, and stumble forward until memory outpaces reality. As you walk through a ruined monastery courtyard, moss creeping across broken pillars, you hear a voice chanting. A single monk remains keeping vigil in the silence. His mantra rises into the night, steady and calm, as though insisting that even if empires crumble, devotion endures. You linger by the broken stone, the sound of his prayer like a candle's flame holding against wind. The empire may be weakening, yet in the hush of its decline you feel a strange peace. The grandeur has dimmed, but memory holds fast. The Gupta world, once ablaze, now glows like embers, soft fading, but still warm when you lean close. You keep walking through the dim corridors of a fallen palace until the hall opens to morning, thin light drifting dust, a swallow stitching the sky with its wing. The empire you've traced has loosened, yet its aftersound lingers, and you realize you are still inside it every time you count, read, sing, or look up at a calm-faced god carved in stone. You step out into a courtyard where broken pillars lean like tired men, and beside them a single lotus pushes through a crack. It feels like a lesson the land teaches without speaking. Endings are messy, legacies are patient. You follow that patience across centuries. In a scriptorium far away in time, a scholar copies numerals that first took confident shape on the subcontinent, the place value system, with a small, startling symbol for nothing that lets everything else arrange itself. This is a plain historical fact. Indian numerals and the concept of zero refined in this classical milieu travel through the Arabic-speaking world and later into Europe, remaking mathematics and the way you balance the simplest errands in your head. You think of your to-do list, groceries bills, a kind text you keep meaning to send, and realize that without those quiet digits, you'd still be counting on heaps of pebbles. Language carries echoes too. The rounded Gupta script, brushed and carved across copper and stone, leans forward into later forms. Over long miles of time, its strokes will help father scripts like Nagar, the ancestor of the Devanagari letters you might recognize on a modern sign or in a friend's tattoo. The evolution is not a straight road, no legacy ever is, but you can run a finger along inscriptions and feel the continuity hum, like a chord changing key but refusing to lose its root. Historians still argue whether Gupta script names a tidy, unified hand or a family of regional styles gathered under a convenient umbrella. Either way, the letters you meet today still remember those round, assured curves. Art holds the mirror steady. You visit a shrine whose doorway frames a figure so poised, so composed, that the room's bustle softens by reflex. The so-called Gupta classical style, with its serene faces, balanced bodies and cloth carved thin as breath, becomes a grammar that other artists study for centuries. You see its ripple in the stone of Deogar's Vishnu temple, where a panel shows the god sleeping on the cosmic serpent, the universe dreaming itself orderly again. You see it sail outward along trade routes and memory lanes touching distant shores, where sculptors and painters rework its calm into their own languages of grace. Poetry keeps walking with you. Kalidasa's lovers wait under monsoon clouds that still know the way to your window pane. A play about a ring and a memory moves beyond court to village, beyond the subcontinent, to foreign stages, joining that small club of stories that seem to fit whatever mouth they borrow. A child who has never seen a Sanskrit manuscript still understands the hush. When a letter is found, a reunion is possible. A garden remembers footfalls. The old rasa theory of moods and flavors turns into a portable kit for makers in many lands: how to brew sweetness without cloy, how to pour sorrow without drowning the room. Historians still argue whether later tellings of 9 gems at a king's court are history or halo, but they agree that the light thrown by these texts kept finding faces to warm. Certain objects stubbornly refuse to fade. You stand beneath a tall iron pillar, its skin untroubled by time, in a way that seems impolite to time. Inscribed praises mention a king whose name ties to the Gupta line, and metallurgists today can tell you why the pillar weathers so well phosphorus and process, and the way Delhi's air treats the metal like an honored guest. Yet another layer clings for years. People believed that if you stood with your back to the pillar and encircled it with your arms, a wish would hear you better. The custom is now discouraged to spare the metal's surface, but the memory of that wish hug remains a curious, mystical tidbit about how humans will always try to touch luck into waking. Trade winds once braided the empire to the world, and the braid holds. You wander a museum farther west where a glass case holds Roman coins found in Indian soil and Indian beads found in desert dust. A label with tidy serif type says what the songs already told you: ships moved with the monsoon, caravans with the season, and ideas with any excuse at all. In another room, a bronze Vishnu from Southeast Asia carries the Gupta calm across oceans, proof that style does not need passports when hands remember what they love. Memory becomes architecture, and architecture becomes map. The foundations of monasteries like Nalanda flare and dim across centuries, but the idea of a great scholastic hearth, students crossing continents to sit at a teacher's knee, feels familiar even if you call it by modern names. You step into a university hall today and hear the same weather of debate you left in that lamplit sabah, someone arguing form, someone defending usage, someone asking if meaning arrives all at once or in pieces. Historians still argue whether Nalanda's earliest bricks belong firmly to Kumaragupta's time or a shade later, but the image of a campus in a mango grove, cells, libraries, kitchens, smoking at dawn remains one of the subcontinent's favourite self-portraits. You think of governance and how it travels. Copperplate charters with their ribboned legal language survive damp and fire to tell you how a village was granted, how a tank was dug, how a boundary stone was set, where the peepal casts its noon shadow. Guilds keep records with a clerk's neat pride. Law codes tangle with custom, and in the tangling learn to be useful. You hear modern arguments about property and duty and shrug at how old the questions are. The answers change costume, the questions have permanent address. There are softer survivals too. A girl in a kitchen ties a red thread around a brass jar before a journey. A grandmother hums a raga that tracks the season as surely as a calendar. A dancer lifts her hand and without thinking tells a whole story in the small pivot of a wrist. If someone asked them to name the Gupta Empire, they might laugh and pour you tea. Yet when you watch their gestures and listen to their timing, you're convinced that what we call legacy is mostly the body remembering what worked. And then there is the label you started with, that glowing phrase, Golden Age. You look back over calm statues and coin-bright kings and you feel the tug to end with a crown emoji. Historians still argue whether golden flattens what was thorny, whether it was golden for everyone, whether the shine is partly a light cast backward from later hopes. You let those cautions sit beside the glow. Both are true. Life was uneven and something rare did happen. A span when peace held long enough for art to practice, breathing for numbers to lean into, daring for debate to get good at being kind. At last you hear the river you followed since the first section, speaking again at the city's edge. The water is darker now, flecked with lamps set afloat by hands that don't ask eras for permission. You cup some of that water and bring it to your lips. It tastes like stone and leaf and a little ash, like mornings you've already lived and mornings that want to be born. You walk on quiet as a footnote, knowing that the empire is not a country on a map anymore, but a habit of mind grace, favoured over force curiosity yoked to care, and the comfort of a story that ends by opening. The wind down drifts in now like a curtain, letting the last of the daylight through, and you let your breath fall into a longer, softer rhythm like oars easing on a wide, calm river, like the hush that comes to a market once the lamps have been pinched, closed, and the counters wiped clean, like the cool of a courtyard after rain. You do not need to follow roads anymore or weigh coins or choose among voices. You only need to rest, and the story you have carried all this way begins to carry you, lifting you with the same quiet confidence as a well-made boat. The pillars and palaces fade to silhouettes, the carvings smooth into shadows that still remember kindness, and the river widens until it feels like sky, a soft dark that understands your weight and welcomes it. Somewhere, a veena holds a single note, and it stays so true and for so long that you stop listening for its end, and simply let it be the air, and you take it in with each easy breath, and you let it go again without having to think about any of it. All the careful arguments go on somewhere far away, happy to do their work, without you watching. The numbers keep their own small lanterns lit. The dancers fold their hands and step off the stage. The scholars close their leaves with a whisper that sounds a little like sleep. You are safe here at the edge of a story that turns into a shoreline and then into a pillow safe with the old river remembering your name. Safe with the night, practicing its gentle art of forgetting what needs to be forgotten and holding what needs to be held. The boats are tied, the city is dim, the lamps are steady, and you are drifting easy and unhurried into the kindest part of the dark.